The stars stretched endlessly before Captain Jakir as he sat in the command chair of the Vralith, the flagship of the Tikari Dominion. His golden eyes glowed faintly under the dim bridge lights, scanning the massive fleet displayed on the main screen. Hundreds of warships, each armed with the finest weapons their species had developed, moved in tight formation. Their goal was simple: conquer new territory, claim valuable resources, and expand their empire. But this time, their target was different. They were invading human space. Jakir had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The warnings from other species. The scattered ruins of fleets that had dared to challenge humanity. The eerie silence that followed every attempt to trespass into their domain. Yet, despite the rumors, no solid evidence had ever been recovered. The official reports always ended the same way: missing. No survivors. It didn't make sense. Humans were not the strongest species. Their technology, while advanced, was not the best in the galaxy. Their fleet was not the largest. And yet, no one who waged war against them ever returned to tell the tale. Jakir did not believe in ghosts. He did not believe in myths. He believed in power, in strategy, in cold, calculated warfare. And from everything he had seen, humanity was just another species waiting to be crushed under the might of the Dominion. "Status report," he ordered, his voice calm and firm. His second-in-command, a tall, sharp-featured officer named John, turned from his console. "The fleet is moving as planned. We will reach the outer perimeter of human space within 2 cycles. No resistance detected so far." Zakir allowed himself a small smirk. It was always the same. The weak never knew when to fight back until it was too late. Increase speed. I want to see what these so-called dangerous humans really have to offer. The fleet pressed forward, their ships cutting through the void like silent predators. Then something changed. A small red light flashed on the command console. Jonal's brow furrowed as he examined the readings. "Captain, we are detecting wreckage ahead." Jakir narrowed his eyes. What kind of wreckage? The main screen flickered, displaying the scene ahead. It was a graveyard of ships. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, floating lifelessly in the dark. Twisted metal, shattered hulls, drifting debris, all frozen in the emptiness of space. A cold silence filled the bridge. Jonal zoomed in on the wrecks. "These are not human ships." Zakir leaned forward, studying the shattered remains. He recognized the designs. These were ships from various species: the Krell, the Vorthan, the Ikari. All known for their aggressive attempts to expand their territory. All known for their past wars with humanity. None of them had ever returned. A chill crept up Shakir's spine, but he pushed it down. Coincidence. Perhaps these were old battles. Fleets that had fought among themselves and been forgotten. He refused to believe the alternative, that humanity had done this. "Weapons damage?" he asked, his voice steady. Jonal hesitated before answering. "Unknown. Some of the ships look as if they were torn apart from the inside. Others have clean cuts, as if something sliced through their hulls with precision." Jakir frowned. That was strange. Most battles left clear signs of destruction. Explosions, burn marks, impact damage. But this was something else entirely. "Sir," another officer called out, his voice tight with fear. "We are picking up a faint distress signal. It's coming from the wreckage. A distress signal. After all this time." "Play it," Jakir commanded. The speakers crackled to life. A voice, distorted, weak, barely audible. "If anyone can hear this, turn back. Do not enter human space. It is not what you think. It is not." Static. Zakir clenched his jaw. The signal had cut off abruptly. Whoever had sent it had not lived to finish their warning. The bridge was deathly silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken. These were warriors, soldiers who had seen countless battles. And yet, the sight before them unsettled even most hardened among them. Zakir refused to let fear take root. "Send a squad to investigate," he ordered. Janol hesitated. "Sir, is that wise?" Zakir turned to him, his golden eyes narrowing. "Are you questioning my command?" Janol straightened, but there was doubt in his gaze. "No, Captain. I will assemble a team immediately." Minutes later, a small group of scout ships detached from the fleet, moving cautiously toward the wreckage. The main screen displayed their progress, the small crafts weaving through the debris field. Zakir watched intently. He would find the truth. He would uncover the secrets humanity was hiding. The first scout reached the largest wreck, a Vorthan battleship, its hull cracked open like a broken shell. The pilot activated his comms. "We are inside the ship. No signs of life. It looks like they never had a chance to fight back." Another scout moved toward a derelict Krell cruiser. "We are detecting something strange. There are no bodies. Not a single one. It's like the crew just vanished." Zakir's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. No bodies. That was impossible. Even if they had been destroyed in battle, there would be remains. Traces of organic matter. Something. "Sir," one of the officers on the bridge gasped. "The third scout. It's gone." Zakir snapped his head toward the screen. One of the small crafts had disappeared. No explosion. No warning. It was just gone. "Pilot, report." Zakir barked into the comms. Silence. Then static. Then a voice. Twisted, broken, filled with horror. "They are here." The transmission ended. A pulse of fear rippled through the bridge. Zakir rose from his chair. "Recall the scouts." Now. The remaining ships turned, their engines burning as they rushed back toward the fleet. But something moved in the darkness. A shadow, barely visible against the void, weaving between the wreckage. Fast. Too fast. One of the scouts screamed. His ship flickered, then vanished. No explosion, no debris, just an empty void where he had been. The last scout barely made it back, its hull scarred, its pilot gasping for breath. "Sir, it's not a fleet. It's not an army. It's something else. Something watching us." Zakir's claws dug into his armrest. He had never feared battle. Never feared death. But this was something he did not understand. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Full speed ahead. We continue the mission." Janol looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, are you sure? Whatever is out there is exactly what we came to find." Zakir interrupted coldly. "We do not run from shadows. We are the Tikari Dominion. We will see what humanity is hiding in their space." The fleet moved forward, and deep in the void, something moved with them. Watching. Waiting. The fleet pressed deeper into human territory, their warships cutting through the endless black void of space. Captain Zakir stood on the bridge of the Vraleth, his golden eyes locked on the screen ahead. His mind replayed the events from earlier, the ghostly wreckage, the missing scouts, the chilling distress signal. Something was out there. Something was watching. But Zakir was not a coward. He would not turn back. "Status report," he ordered. Janol's voice was tight with tension. No new contacts yet. But he hesitated. "But what?" Zakir snapped. The officer swallowed. "Our sensors are behaving strangely. We are detecting faint movements, but when we try to scan them, they vanish, almost as if they're not there." Another officer finished. A cold silence filled the bridge. Zakir clenched his jaw. The air was thick with something unseen, something lurking just out of reach. But fear was a weapon of the weak. "Humans are not gods," he said firmly. "They are flesh and blood, just like us. Whatever tricks they are using, we will expose them." We move forward. The fleet advanced. Then it happened. The ship closest to them, a massive war cruiser named Tarekkun, suddenly shuddered. Its hull groaned as something unseen struck it with incredible force. "Report," Jacques barked. "Unknown impact detected on the Tarak Kun. No visible enemy, no energy signatures." "That's impossible." Another impact. Harder this time. The Tarak Kun jerked violently, its shields flickering as alarms blared across the fleet. Then the screaming started. A distress call crackled through the comms. "They're inside." Zakir's blood ran cold. "Inside? What are you talking about?" "We don't know." There was nothing on the sensors. "But they're here." "There." The transmission cut off. The bridge fell silent. Then the main screen flickered to life, showing a live feed from inside the Tarak Hun. Zakir's claws dug into the armrest. The corridors of the ship were drenched in blood. The crew, hardened warriors, trained in combat, were dead. Not just dead, erased. Their bodies were slashed open with surgical precision, as if something had torn them apart in the blink of an eye. No alarms had gone off. No intruders had been detected. And yet, the slaughter had already begun. "Sir," Janul's voice was barely above a whisper, "we have lost contact with the Tarak Kun." Jacques' mind raced. This was not a normal battle. There was no enemy fleet, no visible threat. Something unseen had entered the ship, something that should not exist. "Prepare to fire on the Tarak Kun," he said, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. The bridge crew turned to him in shock. "But, sir, our own men." "They are already dead," Jacques said coldly. "Whatever is in there is not ours anymore." Janul hesitated. Then, with a slow nod, he relayed the order. The fleet's weapons locked onto the Tarak Kun. Missiles primed. Plasma cannons charge. Zakir took a breath. "Forgive me." "Fire." The void lit up as the fleet unleashed hell on their own warship. Explosions ripped through the Tarak Kun, its once mighty hull torn apart in a blaze of fire. The ship cracked open, splitting in half before finally erupting into a cloud of debris. Silence fell once more. Zakir exhaled slowly. The ship was gone. Whatever had been inside it was destroyed. Or so he thought. The moment the Tarak Kun was reduced to wreckage, the lights on the Vraleth flickered. A deep, unnatural sound echoed through the speakers, a whisper layered with something dark and unreadable. Then, a single word came through the comms. "Run." Jacques' heart pounded. It was not a warning. It was a promise. And it was already too late. The horror had only just begun. Zakir's claws gripped the armrest so tightly that the metal bent under his grip. The bridge of the Vraleth was deathly silent, every officer frozen as the eerie whisper faded from the comms. "Run." The word still echoed in his mind. Not a warning, a promise. And then, chaos. Power fluctuations across the fleet. One officer shouted, "Our systems are flickering." Zakir's gaze snapped to the main screen. His warships, once moving in perfect formation, were breaking apart, drifting out of sync. Some flickered in and out of visibility, their cloaking fields failing. Others spun wildly, as if hit by an invisible force. "Enemy fleet detected," he demanded. "None," the sensor officer cried. "We are still alone." Jacques' gut twisted. This wasn't war. This wasn't strategy. This was something else. A sudden, sharp bang echoed through the Vraleth. The entire ship lurched, nearly knocking everyone off their feet. "Impact detected." Another officer shouted, "But there's nothing on sensors." Then the screaming started. A security feed from one of the lower decks blinked onto the screen. The crew stationed there were convulsing, their bodies writhing as if unseen hands were twisting them apart. Blood sprayed across the walls, but no enemy was visible. Jacques' breath caught. This wasn't a battle. This was a massacre. A new voice broke through the bridge's speakers, hollow and calm. "You should not have come here." The words were in the human tongue. A deep primal fear settled into Jacques's chest. "Who are you?" he growled. The voice chuckled softly, like a predator amused by its prey. "The question is not who I am, Captain Jacques." The whisper grew colder. "The question is, how many of us are already on your ship?" The bridge's lights flickered. Jacques's blood ran cold. A shriek rang out from the far side of the bridge. One of his officers lifted off the ground, his body thrashing violently. His eyes bulged, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Then, with a sickening snap, his head twisted completely backward. His corpse dropped to the floor. Jacques drew his sidearm in a flash, his crew doing the same. "Show yourselves," he roared. Silence. Then a shadow moved. Not from the walls, not from the ceiling. From inside the darkness itself. A shape flickered at the edge of their vision, inhumanly fast, vanishing the moment they tried to focus on it. Then another, and another. The Vraleth was no longer their ship. It belonged to the ghosts now. Jacques gritted his teeth. All hands, battle formations. The bridge crew scrambled to obey, but the moment they moved, the nightmare began. A second officer was lifted, his body yanked into the air. He barely had time to gasp before his limbs ripped apart in different directions, as if unseen claws had torn him from the inside. Blood sprayed across the consoles. The thing, whatever it was inside with them. Jacques fired. His plasma shot tore through the space where the shadow had flickered. It hit nothing. His mind screamed at him. This was impossible. There was no enemy fleet, no battle formations. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. Another flicker, this time behind him. Jacques spun, firing 3 shots, just in time to see a shadow shift, twisting into the shape of a human soldier in sleek, jet-black armor. A visor hid its face, but Jacques felt the eyes watching him. Not with anger, not with fear, but with amusement. The thing tilted its head, as if considering him. Then, in a voice that sent ice through his veins, it whispered, "Your war is already over." Jacques' stomach dropped. And then, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the ship, and the screaming began anew. Darkness swallowed everything. Jacques' breathing was sharp, ragged. His claws gripped his plasma rifle so tightly his fingers ached. Around him, his officers stood frozen, weapons raised. But it didn't matter. The black void that had taken the ship was absolute. The screams had stopped. That was worse. A dull, rhythmic sound echoed through the bridge. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, deliberate footstep. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't rushed. It was a predator walking through its own domain. Jacques forced himself to move. His voice came out hoarse. "Bridge crew, activate emergency lights. Full lockdown." No one answered. His heart pounded. "Did you hear me? Activate the..." A whisper sliced through the dark. "They can't hear you anymore, Captain." Jacques' blood turned to ice. Something moved behind him. His instincts screamed. He spun, aiming his rifle, but there was nothing. Just the thick, suffocating black. His breath quickened. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship's dying systems. Then, a voice. Ragged, desperate. "Yes, sir." It came from the tactical officer. Jacques turned, barely able to make out the silhouette of one of his best warriors. "Something's wrong," the officer whispered. His form was shaking, but not from fear, from pain. Jacques' vision adjusted, and then his stomach dropped. The officer's arms were wrong. His armor was cracking, shifting. The plates bent inward, as if something inside was twisting, changing. His breathing was wet, gurgling. Then he screamed, not in fear, in agony. His body convulsed, the bones snapping loud enough to echo through the bridge. His limbs twisted unnaturally, his back arching. Something inside him was tearing its way out. Jacques stepped back, bile rising in his throat. The officer's face was melting. No, reshaping. His skull bulged, the ridges of his species fading. His once yellow eyes darkened, turning into two pits of pure, endless black. Zakir's grip tightened on his rifle. This wasn't war. This was something worse. The officer's body stilled. His breathing stopped. Then, his head turned toward Zakir. Slowly, unnaturally. And he smiled. Not the expression of a warrior. Not the grin of a friend. But the empty, joyless smile of something that no longer belonged to this world. Run. The thing that had once been his officer whispered. Then the bridge exploded into chaos. Bodies were yanked into the air, screaming. The emergency lights flickered back on for just a second, and Zakir saw them. The shadows. Dozens. No, hundreds. Figures moving in the dark, slipping through the ship like ghosts. They weren't using weapons. They weren't shooting. They were hunting. Zakir fired. His plasma rifle lit up the room, burning through one of the creatures. It shrieked, twisting unnaturally as it collapsed. The others didn't stop. They laughed. Zakir didn't wait. He moved, fast, grabbing the nearest officer still standing. We need to get to the command core. Now. The survivors ran, stumbling over the bodies of their fallen comrades. Behind them, the shadows followed. Not in a rush. Not in desperation. But with the slow, patient certainty of hunters playing with their food. Zakir's mind raced. His fleet was compromised. His crew was changing. This wasn't an invasion. This was a warning. And the message was clear. No one invades human territory and lives. Zakir ran. The emergency lights flickered as he stormed through the corridors of the Vraleth, his remaining crew scrambling behind him. Each step echoed through the hollow ship, but the sound was drowned out by something worse. The laughter. Not a joyous laugh. Not a warrior's cry. It was the sound of something playing with its prey. The shadows moved along the walls, shifting with every flicker of light. Shapes slithered in and out of view, always just at the edges of their vision, never clear enough to shoot. Captain, one of his officers, Talek, stumbled beside him, panting. What? What are they? Zakir didn't answer, because he didn't know. His mind screamed for logic. This was supposed to be a simple invasion. Humanity was primitive, nothing more than a minor species on the galactic stage. They didn't have this. But the truth was undeniable. This wasn't a war. It was a trap. The doors to the command core came into view, a thick, reinforced bulkhead meant to withstand full-deck decompression. If they could get inside, they could fight. Move, Zakir barked. His officers surged forward, nearly reaching the door. When it happened, the lights died. Total blackness swallowed the corridor. And then, whispers. You should not have come here, Captain. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't anything. It came from everywhere at once, a whisper that slithered into their bones. A crack rang out. Then another. Zakir's pulse spiked. Keep moving. Don't stop. Talek screamed. Zakir turned just in time to see his officer lifted into the air, thrashing violently. Something wrapped around him. A tendril of blackness, twisting into his armor, burrowing inside. Talek's screams warped, turning into something wrong. Then his body stilled. He turned. His eyes, once fierce and yellow, were now pits of black. A grin stretched across his face. Captain, the thing that was no longer Talek whispered. Zakir fired. The plasma shot tore through the creature's chest, but it didn't scream. It didn't react. It just laughed. Then it lunged. Zakir barely dodged, throwing himself aside as the thing crashed into the wall. His crew wasn't so lucky. Another officer was yanked into the dark. Their scream cut short. Another collapsed, their body twitching as shadow seeped into their veins. They were being turned. Jacque's claws slammed against the command core's access panel. Override. Open the damn door. The console flickered. The door hissed, then stopped. A single message blinked on the screen. Access SD and ID. His breath caught. What? Then, a whisper, directly behind him. You still don't understand, do you? Jacque turned too late. The shadow lunged. A cold force slammed into him, knocking the rifle from his claws. Something wrapped around his throat. Not solid, not air, but something in between. It was inside him, slithering through his veins, freezing his blood. A shape loomed over him. Tall, human. Black armor, no insignia, no emblem. Just darkness. The thing tilted its head. No one invades human territory and lives, Captain. Its grip tightened. Jacque struggled, gasping, but the cold was inside him now, burrowing deep, turning him into something else. Something wrong. His vision blurred. His limbs stilled, and as the last of his thoughts faded, he realized the truth. His war was over, and it had never even begun. Jacque's mind drifted in a void. Cold. Endless. He wasn't dead. Not yet, but something else was inside him. He tried to move, tried to fight, but his body no longer obeyed. His limbs were frozen, locked in place. His vision flickered, darkness shifting like waves in an ocean of black. Then, a voice. Not from his comms, not from his mind, but from inside his very being. You should not have come here, Captain. Jacque gasped as consciousness slammed back into him. He was on his knees, his claws digging into the cold metal floor of the Vraleth's command core. But something was wrong. The bridge was dead. No lights, no hum of engines, just an eerie, unnatural silence. His remaining crew stood around him, motionless. Not dead, not alive. Their eyes, pure black. Jacque's breath hitched. He forced himself to his feet, legs shaking. Crew, respond. No one moved. He staggered back, pulse pounding. Then, he caught his own reflection in the polished steel of the command console. His own eyes were darkening. It's already inside you, Captain. Jacque spun, rifle raised. A figure stood in the shadows. Human. Tall. Wrapped in a sleek, midnight black suit of armor with no markings. No emblem. No insignia. Just emptiness. A soldier? No. Something worse. Jacque bared his fangs. What have you done to my crew? The figure tilted its head. We showed them the truth. The whisper wasn't a voice. It was a presence in his mind, inside him. Jacque clenched his claws. This is impossible. The Dominion has fought hundreds of wars, conquered entire systems. You are nothing but a minor species. You should not have. The figure took a single step forward. The lights flickered. The air shifted. Jacque's throat tightened. The ship itself groaned, metal bending, warping. His rifle trembled in his grip. And then, he saw it. Beyond the viewport, the fleet was burning. Not from human weapons, not from plasma or missiles, but from within. The Dominion ships were changing. Their hulls warped, shifting like liquid. Shadows slithered across their surfaces, crawling like veins of living darkness. The crews inside, his warriors, his people, were laughing. Not in fear, in joy. Do you understand now, Captain? The human whispered. Jacque felt his knees buckle. This was not a battle. This was not a war. This was punishment. He had invaded a territory that was not simply human space. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something waiting. The human's voice echoed one last time, sealing his fate. No one invades human territory and lives. Then, the darkness took him. Jacque opened his eyes, but there was no light, no sight. Only blackness, a crushing, suffocating darkness that seemed to stretch for eternity. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, but he could feel. Feel something inside him, like a living, pulsing thing, crawling beneath his skin, weaving its way through his veins. He could feel it shifting, rearranging his thoughts, his very being. A whisper came again, softer this time. Closer. You are part of this now. Zakir tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat. He was trapped. Trapped within his own mind, within this thing that had taken him, body and soul. But then, he saw something. A flicker. A glimpse. Light. It wasn't bright, like the stars he knew. No, this light was wrong. A cold blue hue that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. It reached out, stretching into the blackness around him. And with it, a presence. A memory. It was human. Zakir's breath hitched. A human presence. Then the voice again, echoing inside his mind. You will know the truth now. And the light flared. The endless blackness cracked, shattered into millions of shards. And Zakir found himself standing. No, kneeling, on the bridge of the Vraleth once again. But something was different. The air was thick with cold, with an unnatural stillness. His crew, those who had once been warriors of the Dominion, were now standing as if frozen in place. Their eyes were empty, their faces blank, like the lights of their minds had been extinguished. And in front of him, standing tall and unmoving, was the human. This time, it was clear. The figure wasn't clad in black armor. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't an enemy. It was human. A woman. Her eyes were bright, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, like the stars themselves had been captured within them. Her hair cascaded down in dark waves, and her skin shimmered with a strange metallic sheen. And her smile wasn't kind. It wasn't merciful. It was a smile that knew everything. You thought you were the hunters, Captain, she said, her voice soft, but filled with an icy authority. You thought you could conquer everything in your path, take what you wanted, but you never understood. You never knew. Humanity is not just a species, Zakir. It is a force, a power that doesn't just survive. It bends the very fabric of reality itself. Zakir's heart pounded. The crew around him shifted, their bodies jerking as if waking from a trance. Their eyes began to glow with the same eerie light as the humans. The truth slammed into him, overwhelming, suffocating. He understood. Humanity wasn't just a species. It was something older, ancient, a power that had been lying in wait for millennia, waiting for the right moment to awaken, to unleash its fury. Zakir fell to his knees, his claws digging into the cold metal floor. Please, he gasped. Please, I didn't know. I didn't understand. The woman stepped closer. Her gaze softened just for a moment before she spoke again. You know now, and now you will serve. The blackness began to creep back in, twisting around his limbs, around his mind. Zakir screamed, but it was too late. The final battle had already been fought. Humanity had won. And the galaxy would never be the same again.